This is Danielle Smith. Continuing to be the shadow prime minister, I think. The anti-Americanism is just mental from the current liberal government in charge of the country. And so we have Danielle Smith operating as bizarro world prime minister, trying to repair the relationship with the Americans, making sure that they buy our stuff, and trying to save the industries that Doug Ford is driving into the dirt by constantly picking fights with what used to be our American friends and customers. So she points out that the U.S. is concerned about cheap Chinese steel being shipped to Canada and Mexico and dumped in the U.S. She addresses how Canada could help out the Ontario auto sector, but Doug Ford is having none of it because he last week he said, your suggestion, Premier Smith, before it was her suggestion, he said, no, those have to stay in place. So let's listen.
Jeez.
Well, I'm very sympathetic to what Doug is experiencing in Ontario. Not only is he most impacted by auto sector and steel, he's also impacted by steel. That's part of the reason I signed an MOU with Ontario, that we would prioritize buying our fleet vehicles from the list of cars that are finished in Canada, mostly in Ontario. And I would encourage others to do the same. Ontario produces, I believe, about 1.2 million vehicles. And many of them are not only all the way from heavy duty trucks all the way down to hybrid vehicles as well. So that's our commitment. And I think that that's the kind of cooperation that more and more premiers are going to have to do, is if we're going to see a fewer number of finished cars in Ontario headed to the U.S., then we should look at changing our own purchasing practice so that we can support each other. When it comes to the retaliation on China on cars, I think it kind of misses the point. I think that what the Americans are concerned about is Chinese steel coming into the Canadian and Mexican market and being dumped into the U.S. I could be wrong, but I don't even think that this is a real priority for the Americans. I think that the issue around the EV tax may have been done at the time to try to provide some kind of pathway to a resolution with the U.S. president. I don't think I've ever heard the U.S. president raise that. So all it's doing right now is harming Western Canadian farmers, and it's not even protecting Doug's industry, because they don't have an electric vehicle industry. So it's a bit of a phony war that we put in place 100% tariff on an industry that doesn't exist, and meanwhile the industries that do exist are getting punished. So I think there's other ways that we can help out the Ontario auto sector, but it's pretty clear to me that 100% tariff on EVs isn't the way to do it. I was in fact at a room, and I'm going to probably ask this in every room that I'm in. If there was no tariff on electric vehicles coming from China, how many of you would buy an electric vehicle from China? And I get zero hands being raised in the room everywhere I go. So if there is some notion that there's a whole pile of Canadians just waiting to displace Ontario's cars so that they can buy Chinese electric vehicles, I just don't think that's true.
But meanwhile, Sheila, Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau, going back 2 years ago on their Santa Claus tour through southern Ontario, betting tens of billions of dollars in these EV vehicles, like the one at the GM Cami plant in southwestern Ontario, which, by the way, is now mothballed. I think they sold maybe 1,200 of those EV vans in the US and about 240 in Canada. And then we have the EV battery plant in Windsor, Ontario. And, you know, that's a very odd white elephant in the making, because you could always make the argument, well, even if we're throwing good money after bad, think of all the good paying jobs. Yeah, except that plant has 1,600 Koreans on the payroll. How we got into that kind of arrangement? I don't know any mega projects in South Korea where there are 1,600 Canadians being paid, but the market's not there. That's the first thing. And this is proving to be a monumental bad bet of tens of billions of dollars of our money. And Ford and Trudeau, well, Trudeau doesn't care anymore, but they should be ashamed of themselves.
Don't settle for being on the rate of last resort if you don't have to be. Check your most recent electricity bill. If it says the words rate of last resort on it, then there are likely better options available for you. In fact, you could save hundreds of dollars per year by switching plans. Check your bill, then go to ucahelps.ca to explore your options. You will likely find a better rate and could have hundreds more in your pocket by the end of the year. A message from the Government of Alberta.
Yeah, and just to compare what the Liberals were willing to sacrifice, and by the way, Doug Ford is willing to sacrifice for Ontario, 43,000 family farms in Alberta and Saskatchewan. 43,000. Those are just the farms themselves. Those are not the jobs that are created by it to save the auto sector in Ontario. And just to compare it to the steel industry, which apparently they're moving heaven and earth to save in Ontario, is roughly half the size in jobs alone. So 24,000 people are employed in the steel sector. We've got twice that many just in family farms. It's a $44 billion industry. There's 12 million acres in canola in Saskatchewan alone. That's not Alberta. That's not the bit that they plant in BC and then Manitoba. That's 12 million acres being sacrificed on the altar of these stupid electric vehicles. I just broke my pen in that nobody wants, as Premier Smith rightfully points out. And then they tell us that we have to get our elbows up and choose Canada. Canada's not choosing us at all.
But, to her point, Sheila, and I don't have the answer, because she was saying, what is the demand here for Chinese EVs? I'm not so sure. What has typically kept Chinese cars out of the North American market is the crash test data. You get 1 out of 5 stars. If you get 3 stars, that's considered pretty bad. You should get 4 or 5. The Chinese cars they've tested in the past didn't even get 1 star. They were disasters. But assuming they have fixed that issue, I can tell you earlier this year, Motor Trend magazine came out with a story showing the Chinese EV market. I had no idea it was so robust. Sheila, I'm talking SUVs, sedans, sports cars, minivans, all EVs, so many brands, so many models. Now, like I said, assuming they pass the crash test standard, and they come to this market and are selling for an affordable price, because let's figure, China is not paying their workers what we pay our workers, then I don't know. For the value proposition, maybe there is going to be some pent-up demand for those vehicles.
I just doubt it. I just don't think anybody really cares. But at the same time, maybe the Liberals are going to have to figure out whether there's a climate emergency or not. Because if they want us all driving these stupid things, they're going to have to let the affordable ones into the country. Or maybe there's no climate emergency.
Great point. But if you do, that further undermines all these EV plants and EV battery plants that have been funded by tens of billions of our tax dollars. Like, to your point earlier, you predicted those facilities are going to become casinos in the future.
Yeah, at least they'll be fun. My MP, Garnet Jennis, he posted to X just exactly that. Liberals are opposed to letting parliamentarians look at unredacted Stellantis contracts. Their amendment to redact key documents was defeated. Taxpayers gave billions to this company, yet the company is killing over 3,000 Canadian jobs. We need to see what deal the Liberals signed with Stellantis when they handed over public money.
Yeah, and by the way, Sheila, in the department there's plenty of blame to go around. I'm glad this fellow brought up Stellantis. Until recently, they had a CEO who was committed to all of, and Stellantis, by the way, folks, I know it almost sounds like the maker of a Viagra type of medicine, but that's Chrysler, Ram, Dodge, and Jeep. And basically, you had a CEO who had committed to a deadline of 2030. And think about that. 5 years beyond what the Liberals want, 2035, where all Stellantis vehicles would be EVs. And along the way, what is the most popular Stellantis vehicle on the market? A Ram 1500 pickup truck with the Hemi engine. Discontinued. Now coming back, by the way. Why? Because nobody's buying them. Sheila, I can tell you the Brampton assembly plant, which has been empty for 2 years now, for a couple of decades, was manufacturing the Dodge Challenger, Charger, and the Chrysler 300 in huge volume, profitable, and they stopped production to go down the EV route. And what do you have? You have the Dodge Charger Daytona EV. Sheila, can I ask you, have you seen even one on the road? This is the so-called first EV muscle car. And to make it a muscle car, it actually has a speaker that plays the soundtrack of a V8 engine, which I think is incredibly sad.
Oh my God, how embarrassing.
Exactly. That is embarrassing. It reminds me of, when we were younger as kids, putting a hockey card on a clothes peg on our spokes to make believe it was a motorcycle. But that guy's out of the picture and they're reversing course. But the carnage that has been done on behalf of this EV fantasy has been so self-defeating. It's unbelievable. And you know what, Sheila? I'm sorry. Twice Chrysler has been bailed out. Same with General Motors. So maybe is that the reason they can virtue signal? Hey, we're too big to fail. Even if we get it wrong, the beleaguered taxpayer will come to our rescue.
Right. And I think it actually has nothing to do with the company. The unions pressure the government to do this. And that's why the government does it. I think the company would probably pivot real quick if they didn't have the market interference that the government does. We just saw this unfold with Starbucks. Starbucks hired a consulting firm back in 2021. You'll never guess the consulting firm. I'll give you a hint.
Does it start with an M?
Menzies. Starbucks, which is everywhere. It's already pretty woke, right?